All right, Crockett 36. I thought I would do a love letter to Axis and Allies. G40. I've enjoyed a lot of games and thought I would read through the rules and give commentary and see how that goes. And maybe, of course, because I'm an Axis and Allies player, suggest along the way rules, either clarification or changes. All right, designer notes. Why 1940? That was my first question to Brian Hart, then ex-Avalon Hill brand manager, as he began to tell me about his idea that he had. I had doubts and a lot of questions. 1940, what an interesting time to begin an Axis and Allies game. Historically, the sides hadn't even been drawn up yet. When we think of the Allies in the context of World War II, we think of the United States and the Soviet Union as being top of the list. If we do a game that starts in 1940, we'll have to start with neither the Soviet Union nor the United States as members of the alliance, or even at war, for that matter. Increase the size of this. From a game design point of view, I'd have to bridge some spans of history, Spring 40, 1940 through December 7, 1941, representing a year and a half. I wanted certain historical milestones to occur in the game, and they had to occur in their proper order. Okay, did you hear that, people? In their proper order. Japan should not be allowed to go to war until turn 3. I quickly decided that the game would have to start with the Battle of France. France had the fall and fast. The problem was France was no small token nation, and its military was first class. In June 1940, the British and other remnants of the Allied armies had just evacuated Dunkirk, leaving behind tons of equipment. I decided to begin the game at that moment. The French and British units that didn't evacuate and that still remained between the German army and Paris would have to be represented on the board. Germany would have to have the option of attacking this remaining Allied force. I gave the German forces something that historically made all the difference to them and contributed to their success. I gave them their Stukas. On turn 1, Germany will blitz in France. With the fall of France, the possibility of Operation Sea Lion, Germany's plan to invade England, had to present itself. If it's going to happen, it had to start on turn 2, and the Brits can't be given time to recover. Turn 3 was when Pearl Harbor would have to occur, but not before Operation Barbarossa, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union. This would be especially true if Sea Lion was called off. When France falls, it will mark the defeat of the Allied armies in all of continental Europe. Still, this is not the end of the game, but it's the end of the beginning. The only remaining democracy, Great Britain, will find itself standing alone. The Japanese attack on the United States at Pearl Harbor will unite the two English-speaking powers under a common cause. The Regia Marina, Royal Italian Navy, dominates the Med and finds itself in a good position to finally control the entire sea. Italy is a powerhouse and plays a vital role in the Axis efforts. North Africa becomes a battlefield as British and Italian land, sea, and air units once again struggle for control of strategically important Egypt. In the east, the Soviet Union, with its recent signing of a non-aggression pact with Germany, finds itself invading its neighbor in Eastern Europe. The stage is set. The political situations are confusing, as they often are. It's up to you to guide your powers through this maze. If and when all these historical events actually occur during the game depends on you and other players. You have the chance to rewrite history. This is the biggest, most in-depth Axis and Allies game ever produced and published. This game and its sister game, Axis and Allies Pacific 1940, are about to introduce you to some new challenges, and I hope some great times. This will be especially true if you combine the two games. The first time I saw these two games together, with all the pieces set up, I lost my breath for a moment. I'd like to thank my playtesters. They are people like you. They love the game, and that's why they volunteered their many hours. All they asked in exchange was that the game be good. I hope you allow me to pay them in that currency. Larry Harris. Table of contents. I'm going to read through. So, game developers Kevin Chapman and Mons Johnson. Rule book development. Larry Harrison, Kevin Chapman. Additional playtesters. I wasn't in on this one, the second edition. Jeffrey Auer, Eric Christoph, Mike Davis, Martin Frick, Randy Heath, Dan Kersey, Gregory Smory, that's from Smory Swamp, I think, Kelly Ty, and Craig Yope. And Kevin Chapman and Jennifer Clark Wilkes. And then these are the others. All right. Anything of note here? Not a big fan of the chips. We need a different system. 610 miniatures in this one half of the game. This game really needs to be sold as a box game. Nice, like big edition, $200, $150, all one box. Really needs to happen. All right, moving on. It is spring 1940. Since the invasion of Poland 9 months earlier, the UK and France have been at war with Germany. The Soviet Union and Germany have signed a secret protocol splitting Eastern Europe between them. In November of that year, the Soviets, using some false pretext, attacked Finland. The Russians didn't fare well in this war. 200,000 Finns managed to hold up a Soviet army of 1 million troops. Eventually, the Finns had to sue for peace, and several disputed territories were annexed by the Soviets. The weakness and humiliating defeat suffered by the Red Army didn't go unnoticed by the watching eyes of Nazi Germany. Before long, these two great powers would be caught up in a life and death struggle for their very existence. Before that day, however, the rest of Europe had to be dealt with. First, Norway and Denmark were invaded. Then, with an object of nothing less than the total destruction of the British and French armies in northern France, Belgium and Holland were quickly overrun. Outflanking the Maginot Line, to the great surprise of the Allied armies, how could you be surprised? They did it the first war too, you dopes. The German army poured into the Low Countries. The Allied expeditionary force soon found its way back to the sea, and was forced to evacuate. During Operation Dynamo, the Allies, being forced into an ever-shrinking perimeter, made a desperate withdrawal from Dunkirk. More than 300,000 Allied troops evacuated back to England. That was a terrible movie, by the way. Never showed the real scope of it. I don't think there was ever more than 100 troops on the screen at any one time. However, much of the BEF's equipment had been lost and left back in the beaches of Europe. During those desperate days, more than half of the French armor had been lost in Belgium. Now, with what was left and supplemented by some remaining Allied units, France is facing not only a larger German army, but an army whose tactics and way of conducting war are all too new and too effective. It's at this point in time that we take command of one or more of major powers and rewrite history. As an Allies player, can you stop this Axis momentum? As an Axis player, can you defeat France and or Britain? Can you defeat the bear in the East? How are you going to deal with that awakening giant, the arsenal of democracy, the United States? Your task will not be easy, but world domination never is. Axis and Allies Europe can be played with up to 5 players. The game depicts a two-sided conflict, so if you have more than 2 players, split them up into the Axis side and the Allied side. The powers, including the United States, UK, Soviet Union, and the Axis are Germany and Italy. Each player controls at least one world power. Some will control more than one power. Each turn you take for a power, you can choose which unit to build for that power. When you move your attacking units into hostile spaces and resolve those attacks using dice rolls. After combat, you can make non-combat moves with your troops that didn't take part in combat that turn. Finally, you place the units you purchased at the beginning of your turn, then collect your income for the turn, including income gained from any newly conquered territories. The war is won. On your turn, you build, deploy, maneuver, and command army divisions with air wings and naval fleets to loosen your foes. Loosen on your foes. To loosen your foes' hold on their territory. On your opponent's turn, they will bring their forces against you. The more territories you hold, the more weapons you can build, and the more powerful those weapons can be. On the map are 11 victory cities crucial to the war effort. The Allies begin the game controlling Ottawa, Washington, London, Paris, Cairo, Leningrad, Moscow, and Stalingrad. The Axis powers begin the game controlling Berlin, Rome, and Warsaw. The Axis powers win the game by controlling 8 victory cities for a complete round of play, ending with the next turn of the Axis player that captured the 8th city. As long as they control an Axis capital, Berlin or Rome, at the end of that round. The Allied players win the game by controlling Berlin and Rome for a complete round of play, ending with the next turn of the Allied player that captured the same second capital, as long as they control an Allied capital, Washington, London, or Paris, or Moscow at the end of that turn. One or more players take the side of the Allies and one or more take the side of the Axis. Each player controls one or more world powers. If a player controls more than one power, those powers must be on the same side. If you control more than one power, you keep track of those powers' income and units separately. You can conduct operations for only one power at a time. Once you have decided who will play which powers, prepare the game for play. Okay, so can we skip anything here? IPCs, keep track of them. Setup charts. Take the setup chart for your power located in the box top of the storage tray. Shows the name of the power, its units, color, and its emblem. It also lists the starting number and location of that power's unit on the board. So here it would be, I love the setup grid pattern from the classic game. And I think not only that you should provide that in your 3rd edition, Larry and Avalon Hill, Wizards of the Coast, but also I would suggest you print empty ones, and those can be used for setting up the game in case you can't finish the game. So you have the territories, and then you have the units, and then you have empty spaces. And those are basically rip-off sheets that can be reproduced. And each player would then, at the end of the game, fill out that sheet, whatever's in their territory. And if an enemy was in their territory, they would be responsible for writing G or something like that, or marking it somehow to indicate it was controlled by an enemy and what enemy forces are in the territory. All right, starting incomes, 30 for Germany, 28 for the Soviets, United States, 35. UK, 29, Italy, 10, and France, 17. Okay. Plastic piece chips. Okay. National control markers indicate status on the game. They mark the conquered territories and indicate national production levels. Take all of the national control markers that feature the emblem of your power. All right, let's go down to battle strip, research and development. So this is an optional rule that I'll get into. If you're playing the combined game, whenever you develop a new technology, place one of your power's control markers inside the appropriate advancement box on the chart. Now this, I think, should be front and center in this game. Edition 3, what I recommend is this. You set out the historical development of weapons, and when they were developed, they get the weapons. So, for instance, I did see someone who developed an excellent sub that had I think it was called the Happy Days for the sub commanders. Very unhappy days for the other people of the world, but the submariners enjoyed some very good hunting in I think it was in 1940, and it wasn't until the British had better destroyer technology as well as the Enigma machine that they were able to counter it. So I think you could have subs rolling at 3 the first turn, but then in subsequent turns lose that ability because of the increased. And then, of course, you could have long-range aircraft developed by the Americans with the drop tanks for the P-51 escort fighters, as well as longer-range bombers like the B-29 and others that were able to go longer distances later in the war. Territories. Okay, that's my bedtime reminder. Okay, I'm going to keep going for just a few more minutes. The border colors of the territories on the boards. No, I'm not going to do this. Sea zones, islands. We did get something into islands, narrow, channel. This is silly. This is something I should mention. So there are channels, and you do have a an exception for control, and that's Gibraltar. And there could actually be some historicity behind that. If there is, I'll respect that. But, have a difficulty with the Russian sub not being able to get out of the Danish Strait. Kind of drives me nuts. Exceptions. Submarines of any power may pass through the Strait of Gibraltar regardless of which power controls it. Kind of drives me nuts. But, again, could be wrong. Yeah. I would just, I don't like it. That cost me. I was very embarrassing that I hadn't read that. And I was in the middle of a tournament too. So lost a good bit of naval power because I didn't think he could get to me, and he could. Political situation. Okay. So this, I think, ought to be optional. I kind of think that with the setup the way it is, that the Japanese are so set up. I think they're set up for 1941, not 1940. And that's what's happened with the game, is it's evolved. I have no idea why the Soviets shouldn't be able to do what they do, except to, make this a better situation for the Axis. And if the game is tilted in any way, this the Soviet Union being able to go to war when they want to would obviously make a big difference in the game. The sea zone restrictions, not a big fan of it. Yeah, not a big fan of it. If you want to even out the game a little bit, you get complicated and give away destroyers, but anyways, Lend-Lease destroyers or something. But not a big fan of the restrictions on the United States. So let's go through here. If I was going to make anything change in this, it would be that Russia can attack whenever it wants to and declare war. Maybe you keep the United States. I would say Japan can't attack until turn 3. It'd help the game. And it'd keep the historicity a little bit. I would also fix the map. I would take away that extra turn it takes to get to UK. I know the game was sort of designed so you could have a sea lion, but I am not a big fan of it taking so long to get, as someone in this design team mentioned to me, the distance between London and the East Coast is shorter than the distance between the East Coast and North Africa. So I think it would behoove the game designers to eliminate that and make it so that you can quickly get to London. And that would make Sea Lion more difficult, which, you know what? It was. So it could be an optional piece that actually that you actually would have an extra piece that would be the more Sea Lion option friendly, but you'd actually lay it on the map in order to either combine two sea zones into one or divide one sea zone into two. So that would even out the game quite a bit. Just being able to get to London in one turn. UK. The fact that you can't do anything with the French territories really is quite debilitating. I realized that Vichy France was even more complicated, and I've seen some rules that are pretty complicated and I suppose fun. I did have some fun with that. But the Vichy rules, so that's interesting. But to not be able to take over Madagascar, for instance, or Syria, or some of those African countries, is a little annoying, honestly. The neutrals all being on one team together makes no sense to me. Mongolia cares nothing about South America and vice versa. So I know that they're trying to avoid the neutral. Some people have come up with pacts, so neutral powers that sort of mutual defense. You trigger me, I'll trigger you, and I could see regional pacts where that would happen. Thinking of Afghanistan and I guess Saudi Arabia. Anyways, there you go. Some ideas. All right, we're done the order of play. I've seen some people change the order of play in this and actually put China first. That's really interesting. I liked it. I would definitely not go with the breakup of the of the British Empire. I like Far East Command. I kind of like even more UK. Just UK being UK. If you want to break up UK and Far East Command, definitely get rid of Anzac. That is just so bad. It just, I mean, maybe I'm wrong there. I could be wrong, but it would definitely help. Obviously keep India. I don't think the double damage on the factories is a good idea either. It just makes it so that dark skies and other strategies like that are really effective. Usually against against the allies. So there. What else we got? Order, pay for, repair, mobilization, declaring war. Combat moves. Italy, France. Okay. All right. Movement in this game is separated into combat movements and non-combat moves. During the combat move phase, all movements must end in a hostile space, with a few exceptions. Movements into a hostile space counts as combat moves, whether that space is occupied or not. Additional movements that don't end in a hostile space occur during the non-combat phase. Phase 4. Move as many of your units into as many hostile territories and sea zones as you wish. You can move into a single hostile space from different spaces as long as each moving unit can reach that space with legal move. You can move units through friendly but not friendly neutral spaces en route to hostile spaces during this phase. However, units cannot enter movements in free spaces during the combat move phase except in 4 instances. Tanks and mechanized infantry that have blitzed through an unoccupied hostile space. Units moving from the hostile C zone to escape combat as their combat move. A C zone in which defending air units may be scrambled in reaction to an amphibious assault may be treated in the same way as a hostile C zone for this purpose. C units that will be participating in an amphibious assault from friendly C zone, as well as sea and or air units that may be needed to support it in the case of defending air units, are scrambled. Units moving into a C zone containing only enemy submarines and or transports in order to attack those units. Remember that such a C zone is not considered hostile. If you move all of your units out of a territory you control, you still retain control of that territory until an enemy moves into and captures it. The territory remains in control of the power that controlled it at the start of the turn. Units on the same side can freely share territories and space on aircraft carriers and transports from one another as long as both powers are at war. They may share sea zones regardless of their status. Their shared events must be agreed upon by both powers. All combat movement is considered to take place at the same time. Thus, you cannot move a unit, then conduct combat, then move that unit again during this phase. The only exception to this is land units making an amphibious assault that is preceded by a sea battle, as they must offload after the sea battle is successfully completed. You cannot move additional units into an embattled space once an attack has begun. Land or sea units that move a number of spaces up to its move value. Most units must stop when they enter a hostile space. Thus, a unit with a move of 2 could be moved to a friendly space, then a hostile space, or just into a hostile space. Enemy submarines and or transports do not block any of your unit's movements, nor do they prevent loading or offloading in that C zone, with one exception: special combat movements transports. As the moving player, you have the option of attacking any enemy submarines and or transports to share C zone with you. However, if you choose to make such an attack with a unit, that unit must end its movement in that C zone, and it must attack all such units present. In other words, you must either attack all enemy submarines and transports in the C zone, or you must ignore all of them. You may not attack some enemy units and ignore others in the same C zone. It is possible that some of your units may stop to attack while others continue moving through the C zone. One exception I would say to this is I'm not a big fan of leaving territories empty. Honestly, I think troops should be left behind in every occupied territory. One troop, like Risk. Occupied or lose it. Air units can move through hostile spaces if they were friendly. I kind of like the old, if you got a AAA there, you have to be shot at, but land units must end their movement when they encounter hostile territory. Blitzing tanks and mechanized infantry are an exception. C units starting in a hostile C zone. I'm going to read this, and then that's it, I think. I go to bed. At the beginning of the combat phase, you might have already have C units and air units on carriers in spaces containing enemy units that were there at the start of your turn. For example, an enemy might have built new surface warships in a C zone where you have C units. When your turn comes around again, you are sharing that C zone with enemy forces. If you are sharing a C zone with surface warships, not submarines and or transports, belonging to a power with which you are at war, this situation requires you to do one of the following: remain in the C zone and conduct combat, leave the C zone, load units if desired, and conduct combat elsewhere. Leave the C zone, load units, and return to the same C zone to conduct combat. You cannot load units while in a hostile C zone. Or leave the C zone and conduct no combat. Leave the C zone, load units, and return to the same C zone to conduct combat. You cannot load units while in a hostile C zone. This said, leave the C zone, and then load. Once these units have moved and or participated in combat, they cannot move or participate in non-combat move phase of the turn. Sea units other than submarines must end their movement when they enter a hostile sea zone. The destroyer must stop in this zone. However, the sub can pass through safely because the enemy isn't a destroyer. All right, that's it for me tonight. Crockett 36, Love Letter to Axis and Allies, out.